DevOps is an approach for software development that seeks to improve the quality of software products and the effectiveness of the teams by encouraging more collaboration during each phase of the application development lifecycle. So we go from concept to creation in DevOps. The term DevOps actually refers to development and operations joined rather than keeping them siloed and separated. This helps to create a healthy balance between innovation and stability and allows operations to help the development team to make sure that it is stable as they are providing new development. So the goal of Azure DevOps is to facilitate these practices and features for project management, collaboration, development, deployment, and much more. The goal of DevOps and Agile methodology is to produce better quality software, and you can adopt both methodologies at the same time. So they're not mutually exclusive. Agile has a smaller scope than DevOps. The latter looks at cross-disciplinary collaboration, organization-wide attitudes, and every stage of the software development lifecycle. Agile, on the other hand, is more focused on the development team and their ability to adapt to changing end user needs. In an Agile organization, development is completed in incremental sprints, and software delivery, deployment, and ongoing maintenance of each release is actually managed by different teams. Agile also seeks to place the end user in the center of everyone's efforts. New features are referred to as user stories, and there's a regular feedback loop from end users to the team so that they can continuously improve the software. If we don't bring the end user in during it, a lot of times we get to the end and it's not functional for them, and sometimes causes an organization to just throw out the whole product. Traditionally, teams would have a big board in a room with a number of columns. There would be pieces of paper with various tasks on them attached to the board in appropriate columns. Developers would move their tasks as needed across the board. So you might have columns for grooming or getting more information, column for ready, have a column for in progress, have a QA ready, have a complete column. Just like DevOps and Agile, there are a series of underlying principles to Kanban that explain how these boards came about. For instance, Kanban as a philosophy of productivity emphasizes the visualization of work. So rather than organizing items into an endless task list, Kanban boards represent each item in card form with the ability to change colors and add icons to visually separate each one. Another Kanban principle is the goal of limiting work in progress. The multi-column layout in boards helps to illustrate whether a team is working on too many tasks at once. I can simply glance at the active work items column, and if there are a ton of cards, I might want to adjust that with the team to avoid them getting overwhelmed and burned out.
So thank you for that, Susan. We're now going to turn to Sharon, who has the actual demo for us. Let's see. So let's adjust our view here. So Sharon, you actually have a board in Azure that you'll be showing us today, not actual customer information. It's all based on a project we did internally, but hopefully it's representative of an actual board experience.
Yes, indeed. So thank you. Good morning to everybody. As Liz mentioned, I'll be walking through 3 different types of Azure boards for you today, and just bringing the highlights out on most of them and practical use cases for them. So I'm going to switch my screen over. The first one that we're going to talk about is a Kanban board. And you'll have to excuse me, but maybe some of this information might be repetitive from Susan's instructional or informational video that you just saw. But basically, in this sample that we're going to run through today, I've set up a development lifecycle for a small development project that we've done that Liz mentioned. We did a fun little project that was for creating a website for picnic planning. I want to preface, all of the boards that I'm going to show you today are configurable. Susan touched on that a little bit. Azure DevOps does a great job of allowing flexibility to your not only to your company, but to each and every project you have running. You might have multiple projects running. You'll have shared resources, and they could be different types of projects. You can still manage that project, manage your resources, make sure that you're reaching your end goal. So let's begin with what I've got set up here in the Kanban board. My Kanban board has, it's very simple, basic. My backlog of stories, which is work yet to be done, is in my to-do column. I have a coding phase, which is where my developers will be, performing their coding tasks. I have a testing phase and a completed phase. Very basic, but sometimes you want to keep it simple, and this is pretty basic phases for both a support project and or development project. So let's open a story and take it through. I have a sample story here. Now, before I open this up, even before I get in here, I'm going to explain this column. Wow, this is taking a little bit to react to me. This to-do column is a backlog of stories. Anything in this column, I am anticipating in this setup that it has already been scoped out. We have had the team define the ask. We've had the technical team review it, define the how, and that's where they create tasks. And also, we might also include a little bit of acceptance criteria to do the definition of done. So anything in here is ready for development to scoop up and take into the coding phase. Typically, we would have management prioritize this list. So as soon as the next developer has availability, they'll come in and grab from the top. Cherry picking is not advised. However, there are times where you might assign somebody's name to a particular story because there's subject matter expertise in an area. So for my example, I'm going to be a developer who comes in and picks from the top. I'm going to open up my story, and under the description, I have defined the ask. I know that the ask here is, as the event organizer, I would like to be able to generate a shopping list for the menu selected and the number of guests attending. This is making sure that they have enough food. Okay, I've got that. The person who wrote this up has defined the who, what, and why. Technical department has come in, reviewed this as a team, and they've decided they needed to add a feature to the main menu, create a form, blah, blah, blah. Here is all the technical information that drove the creation of these tasks. Okay. Also, I had a team kind of define my definition of done. I'm using acceptance criteria to do that. In order for this to be promoted and considered complete, I need to confirm that the feature is available on the menu, the shopping list calculates how much food to order. Here's a set of instructions that it must complete before it is considered done. Okay, so let's take this through. I'm a developer, I'm coming in, I'm moving this into coding. Okay, my screens are taking a little bit of time here, sorry for the delay. So now I have 3 tasks assigned. As a developer, maybe I'm doing all of these tasks. Maybe that can be split up, but I'm going to complete the development tasks. Once I click them, they're considered complete. Sorry, this is left over from one of my previous run-throughs. But once I'm complete the development task, I'm going to move this to the done column. Now, when my testing staff has more capacity to take on more testing, they're going to look at this column. they can review this column all along to know, hey, do they have a big data set up to start testing this? What do they need to prep for? They can start looking at even the doing column from development. Ooh, they're 1 out of 3 tasks, but they're 50% done on this, so let me set up that environment. Okay, all things for this group to consider. But once they have availability and they're ready for it, they bring it into their column to start working on it. Now, we can add a task and simply call it testing. Now, of course, that wouldn't be all that they have in there. They'd be putting their test cases. They'd be putting what they're doing. As they complete it, they'll tick off their list, and it moves to done. In an environment where you are working on a support project and you're doing break-fix work, this done column could be something that is reviewed by a release manager. That release manager may see, okay, it's the end of the week. I've got 2 things out there. I'm going to hold off. I'm going to wait until I've got 5 things out there, and then I'm going to go ahead and prep for the next release. So this is something that if your company has that type of role, that they would be monitoring and creating releases from. It also lends to what Susan was saying earlier about being agile and doing iterative releases. I could do a release just because this story hit. This has value add. I could wait on that. So it just provides you the flexibility. In these columns, I could have added extra information, extra columns, extra work columns to the workflow that could say UAT. I could promote this to a user. Then all along, I'm looking at the story value add. The users are looking at it and they're saying, yep, you're on track, you're not on track, and that helps my project overall, and that is being agile. So another way to look at this board, first of all, I'm going to show you filters on here, is I see a lot of cards, and as mentioned in Susan's presentation, is it could be overwhelming. I could have a lot of boards in here. A lot of cards in here, story cards. So I might want to hold my stand-up meetings. And those stand-up meetings, I want to filter down and show just what's available to Daniel, okay? This shows me what Daniel's currently working on, what he's completed. Let's go see if he's got additional work that he could use in the near future. So that would be my unassigned work. So when Daniel's done, he'll be able to pick up a sample story. That may mean you need to work on your backlog, beef that up a little bit, but Daniel's going to be ready after he finishes 2 more tasks. So another way to measure your productivity and prepare for the next thing that you want your team to work on, right? This also, the Kanban board is great for someone to get the executive or management to come look here to see what a person is working on, where the stories are at in the development life cycle, and it really helps keep the developer's focus. That's a great value add of the Kanban board. So now I'm going to switch this to a different view. And the view is going to be a features view. So as we saw earlier, there was a story card, and a story card had tasks associated. I had to complete those tasks in order for the story to be considered complete. This is not really going over here so quickly, but here we go. Sorry for the delay. This is another way to look at the work outstanding. I've created, you can have multiple stories per feature. So on the other Kanban board that I just showed you, we were really focused on the story card and setting the priority, setting the focus for the work efforts for individual team members. The feature board is more of a planning board here because I've set up different phases. These are my milestones. My features are my milestones. My milestones are the phases of my development project. So in planning, I needed to complete 3 stories to say that my planning was done. I needed to plan the games, the menu, and the guest list. When that was completed, my planning phase was completed, okay, and so on. Same with design. Then coding. Coding is in the active column, and I can see I've got 1 out of 5 things completed, and that is still active. Presentation is my end game, and I've got target dates set on each one of these. So that really is part of my planning process. I broke up my project into development phases, and then what I did is I planned out to see how I could fit these stories into a timeline. So let me show you that in a backlog board. So here we go. I'm still seeing the same phases. Under those phases, this is going to take a minute to finish. Okay. This is having a bit of a problem showing in this webinar, but this will be a taskbar, and in this case, it would be 100%. It would be all green and say 100%. The sum of remaining hours or remaining work is 0. On the coding, it would have told me that I was such a percentage done, and that's visual by using a bar chart, a graph right here. Unfortunately, I can't show you those graphs. They're not coming up through the network here, but that's what this would show you. And as a project manager, I'm getting a better view of what overall status I am complete in my project, in each milestone that I've set, which is the phases of development. Okay, I can, this information that I'm showing here is great information, and of course is customizable, as are all of the boards in Azure DevOps. So I kind of want to know from this board, I know that, well, you don't know that there's 33% done, but that's the percentage done in here. I know that this one task, this one story is 100% done, and the other are active. One of these has one of the tasks closed, so I'm about 33% done on this particular story, and that's what these roll up, the graphs would show, and the number of hours would show that I have X number of hours remaining to finish this feature. All good information for a project manager. It allows you a lot of flexibility in planning. And one thing I'm missing, though, if you look, I don't know who to go to for this story and ask any questions. So let me customize this screen. It's this easy. I'm going to add a column, and I'm going to put the assigned to in. Okay. So now it paints. I don't know why it didn't paint the first time, but it's now painting. The network issues seem to resolve itself, but you can see what I was talking about, the 2 stories in the active stage. As project manager, hey, I'm 33% done. I've got 29 hours remaining on this particular phase. These are the stories that make up this phase, and I'm 33% done on this particular story. And I see Daniel's working on it. But you know what? I've got to go all the way over here to see that information, and that just doesn't feel right to me. So I'm going to go ahead and change this screen again and just take this assigned to and move it up right after the state, which is the status of the story. Let's see, I press my luck. Will it display this time? Yes, it will. Cool. Okay, so now I see that I've moved over my assigned to right next to the column I wanted to, which was next to the state of the actual story card. So pretty easy to configure these boards, move things around, add additional fields to it. And like I said, the real value add to this backlog board is for project manager or executives to see, where am I at in the big picture of the project, not just on the particular work item. So that being said, I have these target dates. We talked a little bit about them and how I assigned them, but really, how are we getting there? I see the dates, but what is this new column? This iteration path is actually how we're assigning our sprints. And a sprint, Susan did mention earlier, is really a block of time that you define in your company for your project. In this time frame, you'll have the team, you will assign work into that sprint for the team to finish. The team accepts that work, they review it, they look at the estimates, they agree, yep, I've got enough time to finish that. Let's look at our view options here on planning. Taking on this work and planning it into sprints drives us to when we can complete the story. It creates our timeline. As I'm just going to wait for a second for this to display. If it doesn't display correctly, then I'll jump over to the next screen. But okay, here we go. So I assigned 6 stories to sprint 1 with 12 tasks, and I came up with a bug in there. I also, for the next sprint, I had 3 stories and 3 tasks. My first sprint had 20 days. I really need to complete everything assigned to this sprint. And the reason why is because the next sprint might have stories that are dependent upon that. So if I don't make this sprint and it rolls over into this sprint, I'm not going to be able to start everything that I want to start. And eventually, as that trickles down through, you might push out your ultimate timeline and your deliverable becomes late. So how do we monitor that? How do we make sure that doesn't happen? Well, a good way to do that is to use the actual sprint boards. The sprint boards that we've just popping into here have the same information we just looked at. I've got all stories in the current sprint. Okay. I've completed.
Sharon, while that's loading, we had a comment from the audience. Is there a way to zoom in either in the browser or using boards, like a view setting we can use to make the text bigger?
Oh. Can you do it through the, let's see. Anybody have any, let's see if I have Zoom in here. I have Zoom.
There we
Is that better? Maybe a little bit less? Okay. Is that good?
That seems to be better. Thank you, Dan, for that comment.
Sure. Okay, so I am now in the sprint boards and I'm looking at it through a backlog view. I'm able to see that I had sprint 0, sprint 1 is my current, sprint 2 is my future. I've got 2 days remaining. And it's showing me all the same information that I saw on my backlog, right? The advantage I really like is the sprint task board. Okay, I'm going to shut that down. The sprint task board is going to show me, are you guys kind of seeing that slow response here?
I should have added some kind of elevator music while we
I knew there was a lot of, okay. I'm trying not to pop around too much, but to show highlight all of the functionality, I kind of have to pop back and forth. But I'll talk, are we on elevator music, or do you want me to talk through this, Liz?
Oh, I'd keep going, then we'll see if it settles itself. Internet connection troubles. There we go.
Okay. Are we there? I'm almost afraid to do this. I have, a set list of things that I want to show, but I'm afraid to pop these views back and forth right now, but let's try it. When we get to the task board, woohoo, that's a win. It just flipped right over. When we get to the task board, I'm able to see for this current sprint that I've got 2 days remaining, right? I've got 23 hours that are actively being worked on, 23 hours remaining for tasks that are currently actively being worked on. I've got 10 hours of tasks that haven't even started yet. And I've got 2 days remaining in the sprint. Well, by the story, when I sort it by the story, I can see from the story card, I've got 16 hours remaining on creating the order entry. I've got 3 hours remaining on this. Gives me an idea by story what time remaining I have, and also what tasks are being done. Now, to drive this and make any sense of this, you have to have your team updating the remaining hours. And typically, I would have a daily stand-up. You review with the team. The individuals own this block, hours remaining. We may have estimated when we started this work that it would be 16 hours. But everybody knows after you get involved in something, things could happen. After you spend 8 hours, you saw an area of code you hadn't thought about before or that was problematic, and now you need another 12 hours. It doesn't matter that the math doesn't work here. What does matter is that you're accurately updating it daily, your hours remaining. The reason I say that is, and I could show, flipping the screens here, I could show that when we're doing the actual stand-ups, we would sort by person. You could look at their information, have them update at that point in time. But one of the things that I do want to talk about here, and the reason that it's critical, you have those meetings and you have the developers and team update their hours, is because of this work detail. Now, we talked about planning to move work into a particular iteration. Well, how did I know that I could complete everything in an iteration? Well, my work details screen helps me with that. And the way I get to know how much work the team can take on is by defining who's my team, right? Let this print. Okay, here's my team. These are my team members. This is the role they perform within the Scrum team. And these are the hours per day they've got committed to this particular project. I did mention earlier, more often than not, team members will be shared resources. So you really have to have an idea. You can't anticipate or assume that you've got their full focus 8 hours a day or 7 hours a day even. You have to, every sprint planning session, you're going to come in and say, okay, do you have any days off? Because during your project or during this particular sprint, this 20-day sprint, James may be off for 2 weeks. That has to be accounted for before you pull in points, because you won't be able to make it at that if you don't consider that. So we pulled in our points. We set up our sprint, and at this point, with 2 days remaining, I have 30 hours of resource time available, but I have 33 hours of tasks assigned. Well, that makes me red. Something's wrong. I need to take action. Red is not my friend in this design here. So I look down. Well, work by activity says testing is the problem. That's why I'm red. So I come down. I have one testing person. Let's come down and see what's going on. Whew. Well, this person can only give me 2 hours, and I've got 6 hours worth of tasks backed up for them. I've got a couple options. I, ask them to work overtime. It's a favorite option of everybody's, I'm sure. Or I bring on another tester into the group that has availability, okay? But the fact is, I should be monitoring this on a daily basis, and I might have seen this happen 2 days ago where they had 3 hours assigned and only had 2 hours left. But the point is, I'll be able to make adjustments on a daily basis or, on a regular frequent basis instead of waiting to the point of failure. I don't want to wait till I get to the end of the sprint and go, oops, sorry, I thought I had more time. I just couldn't get it done. I need to know that, and I need to make adjustments along the way. And this work details screen and the DevOps task board allow me to monitor that as frequently as I want to. So another thing that I'm going to point out here is sometimes there's some false positives. I look at the work by activity and I see everything's honky-dory in development. But as I come down here, I see, well, that's not really true. I do have the development hours because I have these 4 people who can do development here, but I've overloaded one person. Jeff here has 8 hours available to me, but I've got 12 hours assigned to him. But look at James. He's sitting out here. He finished his work early, and he's just sitting on the bench. So here's opportunities. Again, this is all good information for you to make adjustments all along the way. I'll go ahead and maybe offload some of Jeff's work to James, or if he can offload some of his work in a different project to James, and I could increase Jeff's hours per day in this project. Okay, they're all options you can make, but without having this level of detail, without seeing this visually presented to you, you often are not able to be reactive and avoid missing deadlines. So this is a great tool to keep your project on task, and I use this a lot for larger development projects and larger teams. So, it helps my planning in knowing what stories to assign where, and that'll drive my timeline. My planning drives my timeline, and my sprint board is driving my ability to complete all of my commitments within that sprint. That is basically going to wrap up the Kanban board, the backlog board, and the sprint board. I've shown you highlights of all those boards and some functionality within them. And hopefully I've shown you that DevOps is very, very flexible. You can build, in your company, you can build multiple projects. It is configurable to not only your company, but to the projects that you load within it. You can go from small to large. You can put in different types of projects, and that being something like a break-fix project for support or development projects. So they really give you a lot of flexibility to manage your projects, to build out timelines, manage your work all along the way, monitor and manage your resources, and ultimately meet your project goals. So I think that wraps it up for me, Liz, and we can go into Q&A.
Actually, we do have a kind of related to what you were saying about scaling to the size of your project and your team. We do have a question from Bill Pattison who asks, How big of teams do you need to justify using boards like this? For example, if you have 1 or 2 programmers that track their own work, it doesn't seem justified. And it sounds like maybe you could use bits and pieces of what makes sense for your specific team.
You can. You absolutely can build your projects however you want to. Now, one question I would ask of you is, you may only have 2 developers, but how large is your project? At what points do you need to track its progress? So if your developers are great at getting things done when they say they're getting them done, maybe you just need to create a Kanban board, but you still want to plan out, what are my milestones? I want a progress checkpoint at this phase to see how far along I am. Am I behind? Do we need to add things? Do you need to make adjustments? So you might be able to use a Kanban board where they just pull their story cards in and work on what they want to, but I would still strongly suggest that you have some kind of progress checkpoint set up, and I've done that through features so that you can monitor how well you're doing and if you're going to make your timeline.
And I guess on kind of a similar note, you've mentioned when we were talking about this before that maybe the sprint view might not be the best for a support team, since sprints are kind of about planned items and a support team might have a more reactive workflow. So it's hard to say at this point we will be fixing this thing because you might not know what you're fixing.
That's a great point, Liz. You're absolutely right. That's why I said on the Kanban board, I think it's great to set focus, and it's great for a break fix, because this backlog, I want somebody who might be the support manager to prioritize the work that comes in, right? Because we know the dreaded emails that go to developers and they go, oh yeah, you know what? Now you've intrigued them and they're going to work on that thing, but this has been sitting there for 2 weeks and I have a screaming customer. So you do want someone to manage the backlog and have development focused on just picking it up. And like I said, the Kanban board works really great for queuing up for a release. As soon as I finish it, we're seeing it after the testing is completed. It's sitting in a column. A release manager is able to look at that and go, I'm ready for a release.
Perfect. Let's see. Again, if you would like to ask a question out loud, you can go ahead and at the bottom of the chat section, there's a little hand raise icon. Oh, we do have a question from Daniel. Is there a separate estimate in the planning phase for development hours versus QA hours?
Yes, you could add that field to your story card. There are, like I said, everything is really configurable, and you can add certain fields to add story points, to plan it on a higher level. So if I've got a huge backlog and I have a business team who is trying to set priority, they might want to look at a high level story points. Then as, after the story is kind of selected as priority and you want to add it to your backlog, you can go ahead, create tasks, and actually you can add an activity and track estimates for QA time. So they have extra fields you can add to the story card and to the task card.